next shocked everyone, and the aftermath would change lives forever. Before we dive into this gripping tale, leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from today, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Jamal Thompson's sneakers squeaked against the polished gem floor as he sank another perfect three-pointer. The echo of the bouncing ball reverberated through the empty high school gymnasium, a testament to the late hour and Jamal's dedication. At 17, basketball wasn't just a hobby for Jamal, it was his ticket to a brighter future. As he wiped the sweat from his brow, Jamal glanced at the clock on the wall. 10:30 p.m. He'd lost track of time again, but he couldn't help himself. With college scouts coming to the next game, every extra practice minute counted. Gathering his belongings, Jamal headed for the exit, his mind already racing with dreams of scholarships and a life beyond the confines of their small town. The cool night air hid Jamal's face as he stepped outside, a welcome relief after hours in the stuffy gym. The streets were quiet, most of the town already too tucked away in their beds. Streetlights cast long shadows as Jamal began his walk home, his basketball tucked securely under one arm. But as Jamal turned onto Maple Street, the silence of the night was broken by the sudden blare of a police siren. Red and blue lights flooded the darkness, and Jamal's heart skipped a beat. He'd done nothing wrong, but years of cautionary tales from his parents echoed in his mind. Two officers emerged from the patrol car, their faces stern and unyielding. "Hold it right there, son," the taller of the two called out, his hand resting ominously on his holster. "What are you doing out so late?" Jamal's throat went dry, but he managed to keep his voice steady. "I was just heading home, sir. I had late basketball practice." The officers exchanged a skeptical glance. "ID," the shorter one demanded, holding out his hand expectantly. As Jamal reached for his wallet, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a routine stop. The air crackled with tension, and something in the officer's eyes made Jamal's stomach churn with unease. Little did he know this encounter would set in motion a series of events that would rock their small town to its core. Basketball practice. How the taller officer, whose name tag read Miller, sneered, "Funny, I didn't know breaking into cars was part of basketball training." Jamal's eyes widened in disbelief. "Breaking into what?" "No sir, I swear I was just at the school gym. You can call Coach Johnson if you don't believe me." "Officer Reed," the shorter one circled around Jamal, his eyes narrowed suspiciously. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. A young man matching your description was seen trying car doors." Jamal's heart raced. He knew he'd done nothing wrong, but the accusation alone was terrifying. "Officers, please, there must be some mistake. I've never dash hands on the car." Officer Miller suddenly barked, cutting off Jamal's protests. Now confused and frightened, Jamal complied, placing his palms flat on the hood of the patrol car. The cold metal beneath his hands seemed to mirror the icy fear spreading through his chest as Officer Reed began to pat him down roughly. Jamal caught sight of movement from the corner of his eye. A small crowd was beginning to gather, curious neighbors peering out of windows and stepping onto porches to watch the scene unfold. The shame of being publicly humiliated burned hot on Jamal's cheeks. These were people he'd known his whole life: teachers, friends, parents, the old lady who always gave out the best Halloween candy, and now they were watching him being treated like a common criminal. "Officer, please," Jamal tried again, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm telling you the truth. I'm just trying to get home." But his pleas fell on deaf ears. Officer Miller grabbed Jamal's arms, wrenching them behind his back. The sharp click of handcuffs echoed in the quiet street, a sound that would haunt Jamal's dreams for months to come. "You have the right to remain silent," Miller began reciting mechanically, but Jamal could barely hear him over the rushing in his ears. This couldn't be happening, not to him, not here. As the officers prepared to force him into the back of the patrol car, Jamal made a desperate decision. "Wait," he cried out, "please, I need to call my father. He needs to know what's happening." Officer Reed scuffed, "Yeah right, so you can get your story straight." "I don't think so, kid." But something in Jamal's pleading eyes must have sparked a flicker of doubt in Officer Miller. He hesitated, then nodded curtly. "Fine. One call, make it quick." With shaking hands, Jamal dialed the number he knew by heart. As the phone rang, he silently prayed his father would answer. On the third ring, a familiar voice came through the line. "Jamal, what's wrong, son?" The sound of his father's voice nearly broke Jamal's composure. "Dad," he choked out, "I need help. The police, they think I've done something wrong. They're arresting me, but I swear I didn't do anything." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then Jamal heard his father's voice, low and controlled, but with an undercurrent of steel that he'd never heard before. "Where are you?" "Maple Street," Jamal replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, I'm scared." "Listen to me, Jamal," his father said firmly. "Stay calm, do exactly as they say, and don't argue. I'm on my way. Everything's going to be all right, son, I promise." As Officer Miller snatched the phone away, ending the call, Jamal felt a small spark of hope ignite in his chest. His father was coming. Somehow, someway, he would make this right. What Jamal didn't know, what no one knew, was that this phone call would set in motion a series of events that would change everything. As the patrol car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a crowd of shocked and whispering neighbors, no one could have predicted the storm that was about to break over their small town. Meanwhile, across town, Jonathan Thompson sat in his dimly lit office, the weight of his responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders as the newly appointed chief of the sheriff's office he'd been working late poring over budget reports and staffing schedules, but all thoughts of administrative duties vanished the moment he heard the fear in his son's voice. Jonathan's mind raced as he grabbed his jacket and car keys. He'd spent years building a reputation as a fair and just law enforcement officer, slowly working his way up the ranks despite the challenges he faced as a black man in a predominantly white department. Now, in a cruel twist of fate, it was his own son who had fallen victim to the very prejudices he'd fought so hard against. As he sped towards the sheriff's office, Jonathan's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He'd always known this day might come, the day when his son would face the harsh realities of being a young black man in America, but he hoped, prayed even, that things would be different in their small town, that the progress he'd made, the bridges he built, would somehow shield Jamal from this kind of injustice. Now those hopes lay shattered, replaced by a fierce determination to right this wrong and protect his son at all costs. Little did officers Miller and Reed know their overzealous actions were about to bring them face to face with not just an angry father, but the very embodiment of the law they claimed to uphold. As Jonathan pulled into the parking lot of the sheriff's office, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. This wasn't just about Jamal anymore. This was about every young person who'd ever been wrongly accused, every parent who'd ever felt helpless in the face of injustice. With renewed resolve, Jonathan stepped out of his car and strode towards the building. Inside, the night shift was quiet, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over the nearly empty bullpen. A few officers looked up as Jonathan entered, surprised registering on their faces at the sight of their chief arriving so late, but Jonathan barely noticed them, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of his son. "Where is he?" Jonathan demanded, his voice carrying an authority that made every head turn. Officer Jenkins, a veteran of the force, approached cautiously. "Chief Thompson, we weren't expecting you tonight. Is everything all right?" "Right." Jonathan fixed him with a steely gaze. "My son was brought in tonight." "Jamal Thompson, where is he?" Recognition dawned on Jenkins' face, followed quickly by confusion and then alarm. "Your son?" "But Chief, I don't understand." Officers Miller and Reed brought in a suspect for attempted car theft about 20 minutes ago. They didn't say anything about where." Jonathan repeated, his patience wearing thin. "Interrogation room 2." Jenkins replied, gesturing down the hallway. Without another word, Jonathan strode purposefully towards the interrogation rooms, leaving a wake of bewildered officers behind him. As he approached room 2, he could hear muffled voices from within. His hand hesitated on the doorknob for just a moment as he gathered his composure, then with a swift motion he pushed the door open. The scene that greeted him made his blood boil. Jamal sat hunched in a metal chair, his wrists still bound by handcuffs. His usually confident posture was gone, replaced by a defeated slump that broke Jonathan's heart. Officers Miller and Reed stood on either side of the table, their faces a mix of smug satisfaction and barely concealed disdain. All three heads snapped up as Jonathan entered the room. Recognition dawned on the officer faces, quickly followed by confusion, and then as understanding set in unison to able fear. "CH Chief Thompson." Officer Miller stammered, his earlier battle evaporating in an instant. "We didn't expect, I mean, we were just Dad." Jamal's voice cracked with relief, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. Jonathan's gaze softened as he looked at his son, but when he turned back to the officers his eyes were hard as flint. "Uncuff him now." Officer Reed fumbled with the keys, his hand shaking as he removed the handcuffs from Jamal's wrists. As soon as he was free, Jamal rushed into his father's arms, all pretense of toughness forgotten in the face of this ordeal. "It's okay, son," Jonathan murmured, holding Jamal tight for a moment before gently guiding him towards the door. "Wait for me outside, I need to have a word with these officers." As the door closed behind Jamal, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Jonathan turned to face Miller and read his expression unreadable. "Explain yourselves," he said, his voice deceptively calm. The officers exchanged nervous glances, neither wanting to be the first to speak. Finally Miller cleared his throat. "Sir, we received reports of suspicious activity in the area. We observed the SUS your son walking alone late at night and decided to investigate." "And at what point?" Jonathan asked, his voice dangerously low. "Did investigating turn into handcuffing and arresting a teenager who was simply walking home from basketball practice?" Reed shifted uncomfortably. He matched the description of what? Jonathan interrupted, his carefully controlled anger finally breaking through. "A young black man walking down the street. Is that enough to warrant this kind of treatment in our town?" The officers fell silent, the weight of their actions finally sinking in. Jonathan looked at each of them in turn, his disappointment palpable. "I've spent years trying to build trust between our department and the community we serve, years of working to overcome stereotypes and prove that we're here to protect and serve everyone regardless of the color of their skin, and in one night you've managed to undo so much of that progress." Miller opened his mouth to protest, but Jonathan held up a hand silencing him. "I don't want to hear excuses. What I want is for you to understand the gravity of what you've done. That young man out there, he's not just my son, he's a student, a star athlete with dreams of college, a volunteer at the community center, and tonight you made him feel like a criminal in his own neighborhood." The shame on the officers' faces was evident, but Jonathan wasn't finished, but it's not just about Jamal, it's about every young person in this town who looks like him. Every time one of our officers acts something prejudice instead of probable cause, we lose a little more of the community's trust, and without that trust we can't do our jobs effectively." Jonathan paused, letting his words sink in. The silence in the room was thick with tension and regret. Finally he spoke again, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. "Officers Miller and Reed, you are both suspended without pay, effective immediately. Pending a full investigation, you will be required to attend additional training on racial sensitivity and proper procedure, and depending on the outcome of that investigation, your future with this department will be re-evaluated." The officers nodded mutely, knowing better than to argue as they filed out of the room, shoulders slumped in defeat. Jonathan called after them, "Remember this feeling, remember the look in that boy's eyes when you put those cuffs on him, and the next time you're tempted to act on a hunch instead of evidence, think about whether it's worth destroying someone's trust in the very people who are supposed to protect them." As the door closed behind the officers, Jonathan allowed himself a moment to breathe, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly ebbing away. He knew the coming days and weeks would be challenging. There would be questions, investigations, and likely some pushback from those who didn't understand the importance of what had transpired here tonight. But as he stepped out of the interrogation room and saw Jamal waiting for him, his son's eyes filled with a mixture of relief and admiration. Jonathan knew he had made the right choice. This decision would change everything, not just for Jamal but for their entire community. "Let's go home, son," Jonathan said softly, placing a comforting hand on Jamal's shoulder as they walked out of the station together. Father and son both knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger conversation, one that their town and perhaps the entire country needed to have. The next morning, as the sun rose over the sleepy town, news of the previous night's events spread like wildfire. Whispers turned to heated discussions over breakfast tables and in line at the local coffee shop. The town, which had long prided itself on its close-knit community and peaceful way of life, found itself grappling with uncomfortable truths that many had chosen to ignore. Jamal woke to the smell of his father's famous pancakes wafting up the stairs. As he made his way to the kitchen, he could hear the low murmur of voices, his parents speaking in hushed, serious tones. They fell silent as he entered, both turning to him with concerned smiles. "Morning, son," Jonathan said, sliding a plate of steaming pancakes across the counter. "How are you feeling?" Jamal shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant despite the turmoil of emotions swirling inside him. "I'm okay, I guess. Just processing everything." His mother, Evelyn, wrapped him in a tight hug. "We're here for you, baby, whatever you need." As they sat down to eat, the reality of their new situation began to sink in. Jonathan's phone buzzed incessantly with messages and missed calls. The local news station had already reached out for a statement, and through the window Jamal could see a small group of reporters gathered at the end of their driveway, cameras at the ready. "What happens now?" Jamal asked, pushing his half-eaten pancakes around his plate. Jonathan sighed, running a hand over his face. "Now we face this heat, and there's going to be an investigation into what happened last night. It won't be easy, but it's necessary if we want things to change." Jamal nodded slowly, a determined look settling over his features. "I want to help, Dad. I want to tell my story." Evelyn reached out, squeezing her son's hand. "Are you sure, honey? It could be tough having everyone know what happened." "I'm sure," Jamal replied, his voice steady. "If it helps prevent this from happening to someone else, then it's worth it." Jonathan felt a surge of pride for his son's courage. "All right, then we'll do this together." As the day wore on, the Thompson family found themselves at the center of a media storm. Jonathan's phone rang off the hook with calls from reporters, community leaders, and fellow law enforcement officers. Some offered support while others demanded explanations or resignations. By afternoon, the family decided it was time to address the situation publicly. They agreed to a press conference on the steps of the sheriff's office, a decision that sent the town into a frenzy of anticipation. As they pulled up to the sheriff's office, Jamal's stomach churned with nerves. The crowd that had gathered was larger than he'd expected. A sea of faces, some familiar, some not, all turned towards them expectantly. Cameras flashed in, reported, called out questions. As they made their way to the podium, Jonathan stepped up first, his uniform crisp and his expression resolute. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice carrying across the hush crowd. "I stand before you today not just as your chief of police but as a father, a member of this community, and a black man who has experienced firsthand the prejudices that still plague our society." He went on to recount the events of the previous night, his words painting a vivid picture of the injustice Jamal had faced. As he spoke, Jamal could see the shock and dismay on many faces in the crowd. Some nodded in grim understanding while others looked away, uncomfortable with the harsh truth being laid bare. "What happened to my son is not an isolated incident," Jonathan continued, his voice growing more impassioned. "It is a symptom of a larger problem, one that we can no longer afford to ignore. As your chief of police, I have failed. If even one member of our community feels unsafe or unfairly targeted because of the color of their skin." A murmur rippled through the crowd at these words. Jonathan pressed on, undeterred, "Effective immediately. Officers Miller and Reed have been suspended pending a full investigation, but this is just the first step. We will be implementing comprehensive bias training for all our officers, reviewing our policies and procedures, and working closely with community leaders to and working closely with policies and procedures and working closely with community leaders to rebuild the trust that has been broken. As Jonathan stepped back from the podium, he turned to Jamal, giving him an encouraging nod. This was the moment they had discussed, the opportunity for Jamal to share his story in his own words. Taking a deep breath, Jamal approached the microphone. "My name